Welcome back, everyone. One of our core values at Nobody Studios is that we're irrationally global. And so we really embed this core value into our company culture. We are always encouraging our diverse teams to think beyond the local markets and consider the global impact of their work. And so, as all of you know, this is something that we are going to be talking about today. And so I'm excited, and I have the distinct pleasure of hosting a dialogue with two of our leaders. And so we've got our visionary Chief Nobody, Mark McNally. Perfect timing for joining us, Mark. How did you know?
Sorry, I was a little late.
No worries, no worries. And then we have our Global Director of Growth and Development, Michael Landers. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And that's one of the things we look at is being on time, how that shifts across cultures. So Mark's exactly on time.
Yeah, that's it.
I'm in Mexico, so I'm just kind of going by the vibe.
Nice.
I thought you were probably taking a nap after our meditation session this morning. I'm like, you needed to quit.
Don't tempt me. There's definitely a nap in my future today.
Good. Michael, as I was getting ready for so Michael is no stranger to our live stream series. He joined me on the Nobody Studios Culture live stream. And by the way, if you haven't seen that live stream, he dropped tons of practical tips on how to build a high performing culture, how to have cultural intelligence, and even how to avoid culture classes. So, Michael, I wanted to ask you this because I knew that was a while ago that we did that live stream, but do you remember when that was?
Now you're putting me on the spot. I don't remember when it was. It doesn't feel that long ago, but I'm guessing that it might be over a year or more ago. Is that right?
That was in March of 2023. I
Wow.
Can't even believe that it's been that long. I knew when I was looking it up, I'm like, I have to go back a few episodes. And then I kept to keep scrolling. And I'm like, it's been a year. I couldn't get over how time flies, especially when we're located all over the world. And so, for Nobody Studios, as I mentioned, one of our core values is that we're irrationally global. And so as we're sort of looking at new territories and how we're going to broaden our Nobody Studios global footprints, Mark's and Michael's insights on how do we decide where we're going to go and the nuances of operating in a global market become really, really important for all of us today. And so, Mark, I wanted to just start off with you. Talk to us a little bit about what was the driving force for having what some would say is kind of a bold approach, right? Being irrationally global.
I think, certainly it's a mix of who I am and ultimately who we became as a studio. I think the way we vibrated our vision and who we are and our life lessons and journeys and perspectives attracted like-minded folks. And so that kind of vibration went out there in the universe. And, we started out with me and my dog in Orange County, and then, a couple people in California, and then someone in Texas, and someone in Colorado, and then someone in Seattle. But within a year or two, we had, half of our team calling in from other parts of the world. And that's partially because that's where our networks were as well. I've spent half of my career building companies overseas, and, I typically say I'm not your typical gringo. I've personally built offices in Shanghai and Pakistan and Dubai and Mexico City and London. And so that's given me a unique perspective in my career in terms of the opportunities that are out there, both emerging economies, which are just insanely exciting in terms of populations that are, I remember I started going to China in the early 2000s. And it was I started going before they got accepted in the World Trade Organization, which is really the beginning of their kind of growth spurt of the last 20 years. Obviously, the seeds were planted years before that. But for the most part, it was still kind of brand new. It was like when, people were just arriving in China for the very first time. And it was crazy to watch because you felt this sense of there was 600 or 700 million people about to join the middle class. And you could imagine what that meant, right? I mean, that's double the population of the entire country, the United States, right? And you could just see the scale of stuff. I would fly to, some city that I can't even remember, but it had 10 million people and a global international airport that makes LAX, look like a third world country, And then you do that again and again and again, and you see these 8-lane freeways going out in the middle of a farm that you didn't understand where it was going, but you come back 6 months later and it was going to that new global international airport with 10 million people. And, people be talking about the high rises in Dubai, but again, you go to some no-name city in China and you'd see a 40-story high rise being built. So I've lived through that. And I guess and now we all obviously know what China's become, but to understand the amount of wealth and impact on human, life, life standards, but also the ingenuity. It wasn't too much before that, in the late 90s. If you declared yourself an entrepreneur in China, you'd be locked up. If you drove down the streets of Shanghai in a Lamborghini, they'd throw you in jail. And about 10 years later, it was kind of celebrated. Again, you go to a no-name city, and a city I don't remember that no one would know, no one's not recognizable, but you would see a Tiffany and Company, store and a Gucci store, and it's just mind-boggling, right? But, I've had a chance to see that around the world, many times over now. And just this sense that there's dozens of emerging economies right now that are coming to life. And that represents a really exciting opportunity for customers. But when I started my career, it was like anything you do overseas was you built it in North America and then you grew it there. I think what's also exciting about these emerging economies is they have their own issues. They have their own perspectives. They have their own problems they're trying to solve, which means they have their own unique opportunities. And you can actually build companies in those emerging markets, bring them completely to fruition, become incredibly viable and successful, find an exit all overseas. Because not only is there the resources and opportunity and capital, but you also now have liquid public markets, which you didn't have when I started my career. There's only North American, Wall Street for the most part. And there's a period where London had an emerging stock exchange. That was exciting. But now there's, dozens of really lucrative, viable public markets. And it's exponentially growing the opportunities. Now, the reason why we think it's a really intriguing opportunity for us is that the traditional industry of finance and capital and venture, for the most part, has been building things within like 30-minute drive of a couple of centers of capital, like Sand Hill Road and Silicon Valley and New York and a few other areas. And for the most part, they're not inclined to get on a 14-hour flight to go to a board meeting and be on the ground. And so I just think that our unique composition of people and perspectives gives us a chance to not just talk about the opportunities, but to be hands-on in the trenches and really aggressive at pursuing those opportunities. Because I think it's going to be the most exciting thing that I'm going to see for the rest of my career is what some of the emerging economies do.
Love it. Thank you so much. And I know that, Michael, you also have a unique journey as well. So can you share a little bit about your journey and really what inspired you to take on your current role at Nobody Studios, right? Which is leading our venture global expansion efforts.
Yeah, definitely. Just commenting on what Mark said, just so spot on, and had some similar experiences. I remember Mark and Sejal, someone told me this story when China was hitting that kind of little tipping point where a farmer was asked to be able to grow different types of products and crops from what they normally grew, and they became very wealthy. And they came home to their little farmhouse with a 60-inch flat screen TV, but they didn't have electricity. Right. That's that speed, right? And I think now, interestingly, as Mark was sharing, was 10 years ago, maybe a little bit less, a little more, startup in a lot of countries, not an option. Yeah, you got to go to YC. You got to hope that Y Combinator or 500 startups brings you to Silicon Valley. Now, startups everywhere. So see, I'm here based in Colombia, and it's like they're becoming a startup capital of Latin America. There's events every day. People are really moving and looking. And just an interesting statistic there, which is, as Mark said, you can become viable. You can have an extremely successful, lucrative, impactful product in country and exit, right? So the whole goal of having to go to US, like, not necessarily needed, right? And just thinking about all those opportunities within regions and countries, that's what's super exciting. So to answer your question, so I'm always interested in global. I'm American from Boston, but I grew up overseas. My father ran international schools, so I grew up in Latin America from 3 to 18, and then spent time overseas in Japan and some other countries as an adult. So I've always been really interested and forced to look at mental models, the way people see the world. And when you look at culture, for me, there's a series of different mental models. And what I've found is the more tolerance you have for more mental models, the more open to opportunity and success you are. And so when I came across Nobody Studios through you, Sejal, thank you again, and introductions to Nobody and with Mark, was here's Nobody Studios questioning the mental model of what venture capital can be, right? And then all of the values that we have are questioning traditional mental models, irrationally global, right? So for me, it was a perfect fit because I feel like if we don't question our mental models, then we'll be limited in our abilities to be have tolerance for ambiguity.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I appreciate you both sharing on this, because, as we expand and reach across borders, right? We know that we're going to have to navigate cultural, logistical, legal, regulatory factors that can either make or break our new companies, right? And so going along with, I want to give a shout out to Matthew Davidson. That's what his question is also going to, is how are we ensuring that we navigate those actually cultural contexts and needs appropriately to ensure that we're making culturally informed decisions, right? And so would either one of you want to kick off that question? What are some of the key considerations that we're looking at, when we're deciding whether to focus on what markets, whether it's global, regional, local, et cetera?
Yeah. Mark, you want to take that?
Sure. So again, I'm a little biased, but I've done international business for a long time. So, even pre-pandemic, it was used to me. I was used to being on Zoom calls or Skype calls at 6 a.m. to, talk to Europe, or 8 o'clock at night to talk to Asia, and that's been a way of life for me for a while. But what I've learned in that isn't that I developed necessarily any different style. What I've learned is to appreciate is that we're all human, and at our core, we approach things very similar, right? Now, that's not to say there aren't cultural differences. Of course there are, and there are ways to understand that. But I also believe that even navigating North American staff has become more complex than anything I've ever seen in my career, in their ways of thinking and what they bring to the table and their values, or how they make decisions, or how they want to be treated. And so I actually think being a leader at any level is requiring you to be very dynamic right now and be constantly learning. And I think as Michael said, a version of it's just like, if you can't figure out how to deal with people who don't think from your mental model and come from your background, you're probably at the edge of retirement, because it's going to be a skill set required to thrive in the future.
Yeah. I totally agree. And I think one of the things that we look at as we're going, more global, and Nobody, as Mark mentioned, from a personnel perspective, has been global early from the start, right? I was just talking to people yesterday at an event, and they're like, so are you US based? And I'm like, well, let me tell you, I'm going to go through our C-suite, and I'm going to tell you all the different places they live. And I was like, Tel Aviv, and there's founders were in Lisbon, and someone's in Manila. And so they're like, oh, you are global. And we are. But going in and looking to acquire companies in different countries, I think some of the things that are interesting to me to look at, which is, when we look at our values and the way we do business, what are some things that are super fluid, that we need to be open to, flexible, as Mark's mentioned, and what are some things that are not, right? Because I think everybody does have them. You can't be completely fluid all the time, or you'll lose the essence of who you are and who our culture is. But culture's malleable. It needs to move. It needs to edge, even within, as Mark mentioned, North America. Like, totally agree. But when we look at that, and this question goes both to you, Sejal, and Mark, what do you think right now are certain things that are relatively fixed for us, that we don't really have a lot of wiggle room on to say, no, we're not going to operate that way. We're only going to do this. Obviously, in industry at some level, but I'm just curious as to what you think about that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Michael. I think that, our brand, our core values, which is something that we've really been, clear on, and really increasing in our communications to people, both outwardly and inwardly in the studio. I think that as we scale and go global has to remain consistent, like you said. I think that's what's going to create that trust. So people want to join our journey. People want to support us, right? People want to contribute, because to build 100 companies in 5 years, we're going to need a lot of people, right? And so we have to build that trust. So I think for me, having that brand identity be consistent is important. And then the other thing, and again, I defer to the two of you. You have way more knowledge on this than I do, as far as scaling globally. But I would say, just from a basic perspective of the quality of the products and services we offer, that needs to not be compromised regardless of the market that we're in. Now, that doesn't mean that we might have to change some of the features to make it, fit better culturally or whatnot, but the actual quality of the services or products, those should not be compromised. So those would be the two things that I would say should be fixed. But, what kind of products we offer, what kind of, preferences or things people may want to, have certain things that are in the product that can change. And then the market strategy has to be flexible, right? Depending on where you're going to go into business. And then, obviously, so one of the things I think we do really well at the studio is getting that consumer feedback early and building those feedback loops into our process so that we can continue to improve what we're putting out there. Right.
Nice.
Yeah, I thought it was a great question, Michael. And all those things that Sejal said, for sure. I think our values, I would say, translate also to, you can be very accommodating to different cultures and make that really part of our culture, is the mix of cultures. I think one thing that cuts through all of our cultural statements is there's like a no asshole rule. So I don't care about your excuse. I will not tolerate you being difficult to work with or toxic. So that'll be a non-negotiable for me. And, glad to be politically incorrect if, someone doesn't fit, and I don't care what their background is, I won't tolerate it. That's just a human requirement, not where you came from. I think something that resonated when you asked me that question, though, is really fresh on my mind. I'm working from spring break right now, this vacation, and I just gives you a little more time to reflect. And one thing I've been thinking about a lot is I listened to a podcast referred by one of our founders, Barry O'Reilly. Thank you, Barry. It was actually from Brian Chesky, the founder and CEO of Airbnb. Mm-hmm. And, they've obviously been on this crazy wild ride, and they've achieved wild success, but he was kind of talking through the multiple innovations and, changes and things they got wrong early on, doing what they thought they're supposed to be doing and getting back to basics. And it was kind of really interesting that at this stage of growth, I think they're like 15 years old or something now, and worth, tens of billions of dollars. He said they worked really hard the last couple of years to get back to like a startup mentality and eliminate entire layers of management and entire layers of, middle management and bureaucracy and stuff. And he was kind of encouraging founders, and I felt like he was speaking directly to me. He's like, I encourage you to not be apologetic of how you want to run your company. And when you get a lot of powerful people with great backgrounds and different cultures, and they're very headstrong and they're very confident and they've got their own great backgrounds executively, you can fall into a trap of trying to appease everybody. Like, okay, I hear how you want to do it. Okay, I can modify that. Or I hear what you think. Okay, I can modify here. And he's like, that just is going to lead to, ultimately, as a leader, you're going to be frustrated because you're not getting the results that you want, because you ultimately build an organization that you don't recognize and you don't know how to manage. And then ultimately your entire team is frustrated because you're not leading them well, you're not managing them well. So everybody's frustrated. And he's at the end of the day, what most people want is clear direction, clear leadership, and they want to be rallying behind a cause, and they want to be succeeding. And so that's just been really liberating to me, because I've seen myself go into that own trap as we have really amazing people with great backgrounds. And I don't mean this in a militant way, but I'm also not going to apologize for how I wanted to run this company. As much as we are a global organization, one of the things that allows me to do what I do is 27 years of experience and 14 startups and a lot of mistakes. And I've got a lot of strong gut instincts as the leader of this organization on how I want certain things to run. But that doesn't mean it's not open for discussion. It's not open for input. It just means we as an organization also have to say, once the debate is done and the decision's made, you have to rally behind that decision and execute and get stuff done. And so, that's one of the things that to me is become like a non-negotiable, because I think that translates to, you have to be clear to people in what's expected and goals and how that's going to be measured. So if there ever is a non-performance or a frustration that comes out, it's fair. And if it's not fair, then you end up getting paralyzed, and non-performers last too long, and that ultimately is unhealthy for the entire organization. So,
yeah, no, I appreciate that. That makes a lot of sense. It's actually, I did some work, 15 years ago when Airbnb was starting with them, and several other times throughout their growth period, and saw a lot of their ups and downs and interesting decisions they made. But them, along with some of the other large companies that I worked with as a consultant, the trap that they kept on falling into, from my perspective, was they were trying to put the U.S. shoe on the global foot, right? And I was always joking, like, if you put the U.S. shoe on the global foot, there's sometimes that you have to have something. The laces have to be the color or whatever it is, but if you try to force it, you're going to cause blisters, and those blisters will come in multiple forms, right? But it was interesting to look at that from something. What's non-negotiable, right? And I think it's completely accurate what you share, which is, look, this is the vision I have. This is how we're going to do it. And I'm going to be open to hearing. But if it doesn't fit into it, let's go this way. This is where we're going to go. And I think as long as people know that, they're cool with it, right? And they join teams, they join families. So I like that. One other thing I wanted to just chat briefly about, which is, this is what I'm seeing. And I don't know if it's accurate across, so I wanted to share it with both of you. When brands go global, I'm seeing a big shift between products and services. And I see that people are very loyal to products, not so much to services. I'll give an example. As the middle class grew in China, people wanted a BMW. They didn't want a knockoff BMW. They wanted the Rolex. They wanted the Tiffany bag, right? But they really couldn't care less if it was Uber or Didi, or if it was Airbnb or China's version of Airbnb. And I'm seeing that here in Latin America too, where services can be more, open. Like, I don't care, but products tend to be more kind of have loyalty around them. So I don't know if what you think about what you've seen in that, in your experience, in both of you, and then kind of what learnings we can gain from that.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think if there was a brand person on the call right now, they'd go fanatical about, that's why there are brand experts, because I might argue that the definition of product or service isn't as important as the implied brand equity.
Good enough.
So I think that Tiffany or Rolex has brand equity that represents certain things that people want to associate themselves with. I would say I'm probably indifferent to Lyft or Uber, to be honest, but I probably care if it's Michael Airlines versus, United, right? I have brand association, even though that's a service, right? That I'm probably a little bit safer on one versus the other.
Got it. So
I would think that there's a lot to do with the brand relationship created with the consumer to actually define that. And it may not be as easy to say product or service, but it's a pretty interesting thing to say. Because I also think you have just as many examples of products where, I love the Camelback backpack, but, there's knockoffs that are, 20% of the cost on Amazon that do the exact same thing. And, I probably won't blink, to buy something that serves a purpose, right?
Yeah. So there's levels there, right? There's depths. I think from the Uber to the airline, and then from the Camelback to maybe the Rolex, right? What is
True.
it? What quality? So yeah,
totally. And a lot of the brands that you just rattled off are, the result of a significant amount of brand equity established over dozens or hundreds of years, right?
True.
I think what's interesting, though, what you just said there, which is maybe a nice segue, and it's now we're getting off the international topic, but maybe not. It's that the engagement and the value you get out of a product or a service versus being transactional, right? And so I think we're now into a more interconnected world right now where your physical products are talking to your digital products, and that makes your life simpler. And those are the things that are actually, those are the predictable moats down the road. I know people who've had Apple for 15 years phones because they just can't imagine switching over, not because they don't like the new phone. They just don't want to even move their contacts and their iCloud and their music and stuff. And so those are roots and connections into a customer. And I think, again, it's probably super interesting to think about on the international side, because when you're in emerging markets, your ability to create those connections where they exist here in North America, but they don't exist there, is really, really powerful. And probably nobody's done it better than China. They've looked at the things that were working well in North America, and they probably just kind of giggled to themselves and said, well, we're going to replicate that here, but our market's 10 times bigger. And so you'll see like the Chinese version of, a lot of the companies are worth, double or triple on the Chinese markets, their revenue, dwarfs, ours here. So I think that finding that interconnectivity is something that's really interesting as you grow internationally, because the opportunities are still there. They're not blocked out.
100%. And that's what something I want to talk to you guys about too, which is I was at a conference, the largest startup conference in Latin America a couple weeks ago. I think there were like 18,000 people there. And I went to every startup. I walked by everyone and I found a couple that were really interesting, but 97% were replicating and 3% were creating, right? And nothing's wrong with replicating, right? There's gaps, but I think it's an interesting conversation from nobody, right? Because I think we're interested in both at some level, but when you replicate to China, the market's massive. When you replicate to Colombia, it's not, right? And the odds of it succeeding tend to not be as great. So the creation space in these kind of emerging markets, for me, I'm very interested in, because they're doing two things. One, they're creating a gap and they're filling a gap, but they're also, most of them have some level of social impact because of the inequality in a lot of these countries. And just to give you a quick statistic, it takes people in the country of Colombia, where I'm based right now, 8 generations to move up one social class.
Wow.
So thinking about the support we could offer in those places. So just curious about that idea of replication versus creation, and kind of where we stand from a nobody perspective.
Yeah, no, thank you. I love that. And I just wanted to give a shout out. Lots of people this conversation is resonating with lots of people. Marissa, you asked about the core values. They're on our website, but we've also done prior live streams. Actually, the first 6 to 7 live streams that Mark and I did on this live stream series, The Making of a Nobody, we went through all of our, and the culture live stream as well, we went through all of our core values. So you could take a look at those there. And Denley McIntosh made this comment: cultural intelligence is critical as a mean to contextualize this vision. Good conversation. And Denley, I totally agree. When I think what Mark and Michael have been talking about is that when we're looking at entering new markets, we really have to talk about, what are the things that we want to make sure we keep standard in our global approach, and then what are those areas where we need maybe a more localized strategy, right? And so I think the decision is going to depend on a number of different factors, and a lot of what we're doing as we're making that global footprint is we realize that it's not a one size fits all strategy that's going to work for all of the new places we're going to go into and the companies we're going to have to build. So we have to be, as Mark said, be flexible and responsive to the local needs while making sure we leverage all of the efficiencies we have in the studio, right? So I wanted to ask you both another question. We know, and this is going to what Denley was talking about, is cultural differences are really going to impact consumer behavior. They're going to impact the preferences, their values, and the decisions they're going to make. So how is Nobody Studios going to leverage this information? How are we going to get ahead of the curve? Maybe Michael, you could kick this off. I know I'll start off with one. We talked about diverse team composition, right? That's one of the things that we're building in. I just wanted to share this quick video and give you a second to think about that question, Michael. But our marketing team just created this video about where our team is located. And so I'm going to try to play this so you can get it kind of it. So I wanted to share that, but that only talked about our team. That doesn't even account for, for those of you that have been following our journey, that we did an equity crowdfunding campaign a couple of years ago as well, where we got over 1,000 nobodies in 55 different countries. And so, we definitely have a global footprint already. So Michael, what are some things, how do we plan on getting that cultural intelligence and staying ahead of the curve.
Yeah, definitely. Great video, by the way. I'm going to share my update, so we'll get Latin America in there as another continent where I'm based right now. So there's a couple things. One, I'll give you an example. So I spent 15 years of my life growing up in Colombia, and now I'm based here. And part of my drive for being here is to really seek what the international footprint's going to look like for Nobody, and look at the ecosystem here, as well as partnerships and potential acquisitions. And so even though I'm super fluent in Spanish, and I even identify somewhat internally as Colombian because I spent so much time here, I have advisors. I reach out to people who know the market even better than I do, right? And then when we're looking at meeting people, I really lean on them to educate and tell me, right, and share with me. So I think part of the cultural intelligence is to have your local partners, no matter how well you think you know a country or a culture, because the truth is always somewhere in between what the local person sees and then what someone who's familiar with that culture from afar might see. So I think that's one of the things that I'm seeing for us. And one of the things that we're looking at is how do we kind of build a footprint internationally? What are the things that'll stay kind of fixed within that? What are the things that need to be open and fluid? But I just think being curious, coming in with questions, and also not assuming that we know everything, right? That's a big stereotype from the US American, that they're going to come in internationally and go, let me tell you what to do, right? And we know a lot, and Mark's got so much experience in the studio, but we're still curious, right, about that, and inclusive. That's the big one, Sejal, inclusive of what's going on in that market, because the nuances are so varied. That's what I'm seeing so far.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I was going to say, I think of cultural intelligence as, and obviously there's a study of cultures, and I've done studies of religions, and there's lots of things you can do to understand people's perspective or their mental model, and that's important. But I think the most important thing of cultural intelligence, at least from my perspective, is the life that I've lived and the travels I've done has resulted in me having countless experiences with some of the most brilliant, genuine, caring, heart-led people on the planet. I would say 50% of my closest friends are not born in North America today because of the journey that I've lived. Half of my executive team and our team overall is international. But so I think that the most important thing is that I have just come to appreciate, without any bias, that there's no better answer, anywhere in the world. There's just great people, and you got to seek great people. And so you can find it anywhere. Sometimes the best opportunities you can find is a great person who's hungry and looking for a chance. And so that's also something that lends itself to emerging markets. I also think that when you think about we know it all, here's what to do. I think it's important to segment when you actually get into the grit of building a business, there's different types of disciplines, right? So if we're trying to figure out how to do a scalable cloud infrastructure that can handle 1 billion users, my guess is my previous background in history is going to find somebody that's more North American trained or had a history working for a North American company that can probably do that work and has done it for 20 years, right? But if I'm doing marketing in an emerging market, I need someone on the ground that knows that culture and knows that thing. And also some of the invention is going to come from markets. And, I've said often, like in my normal talk track, is like, someone's going to bring an idea from a country I haven't been to and identify a problem that I don't resonate with. Like I can't relate to it. And they're going to bring it to life using Nobody. And that'll be the day we arrive. But the point is, like, from a local market, you're going to see something we can't see. And that's wonderful. We just have to recognize we may not see it, right?
Yeah,
and
be open to it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I always say a good example is like fintech. There's been so much innovation in fintech, and payment processing and wallets and all sort of stuff, and very North American led. But when you go into a lot of emerging markets, there isn't a credit system. Most people don't have mortgages or credit cards. You know what the informal credit system is in most emerging markets? It's networks of families and friends.
Yeah. And just real quick, in Colombia, another thing talking about kind of credit, which doesn't exist for the majority of the population because they're not eligible. 1 in 4 Colombians have to get their money from loan sharks. 1 in 4.
Yeah.
So talk about problems and challenges and opportunities, right? And credit's a huge one. So
but again, someone coming to North America and saying, "Hey, I want to automate the family network lending system," you might be like, "Why? Just use Visa or use this other."
Exactly.
It's not going to relate. So we just have to recognize those opportunities. And again, I think if you look at the disciplines, whether it be creation, inception, scale, marketing, those different things, you have to place at least locally the appropriate disciplines to be successful.
Well said. Yeah.
Yeah. Great job. Thank you both. And I think obviously both of you have, through your experiences and in being in the startup world and consulting, have developed that cultural intelligence. But I'm always going to be here to remind us that not everybody does have the cultural intelligence, right? And so we're going to be investing in cross-cultural training, developing cultural intelligence amongst our team members to make sure we improve their effectiveness as they're collaborating with people from different countries. I know, Michael, you and I will be definitely collaborating on that issue. And I wanted to just highlight for everybody else, we're at time. So I know there's some comments coming in the chat. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us and we'll be happy to answer your questions. But I also want to point out that Michael has 2 books on this topic, right? So he's got Cultural Crossing, which really is about navigating multicultural communities. And he's got Present Company, which, Michael, I didn't even know about the second one. So I need to get that one about cultivating cultures of high performance. I'm like, how did I not know that you had a second book already?
Hey,
so
it's all good.
Thank you both for being here and joining me on the Making of a Nobody today. I learned a lot. I know it was resonating with everybody else. And for those of you, again, you could check out our prior episodes on our YouTube channel at Nobody Crowd. And we'll see everybody next Friday. Thank you both for joining.
Thanks.
Have a great week.
Thanks, Mark.
Bye.